Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. Marvel Comics. Devouring the God Genes. Chapter 81. Puff. One sound. This is not another voice. This is the sound of Ava kneeling on the ground. She can no longer accept this fact. If your life is less than 10 years or something, you know you also collapse. What's more, it is Ava who has been working hard for more than 10 years to extend her life. Ava knelt on the ground, and the direction was just the front of Eno. She covered her eyes with her hands, buried her head in her knees, her shoulders trembling crazily. Just a few hours, Eno and Angela's dozens of sentences made Ava's mental breakdown. This is the power of language. Angela saw Ava's state at this time. She looked back at Eno and nodded to indicate that it was time for the final stage. Eno nodded, understanding God's heart. He looked at Ava, who was kneeling on the ground, and slowly said, "Do you want to be alive?" Ava, who knelt on the ground, was shocked. She teleported suddenly to Eno's table and stared at him with wide eyes. "You can save me." After she finished speaking, she didn't wait. Eno replied and continued to mutter to herself, Yes, you are a biological company, and there is no one of the world's top biological companies. You can definitely save me." No. Eno shook his head slightly and said, "The umbrella company can't save you, but I can save you. Can you understand this sentence?" "What?" Ava stared at Eno with wide eyes. "This sentence is not difficult to understand. The company can't save itself, but Eno can save itself, which means that Eno has the ability to save itself." Ava nodded quickly. "It's good if you can understand." Eno finished speaking and stared into Ava's eyes and said, "Yes, I can save you, this is true. But why do I want to save you?" Eno gave Ava a deep impression and finished the sentence word by word. "Yes, I can save you, but I can't save you for nothing." Ava immediately understood Eno's meaning. She said without hesitation, "I can betray S.H.I.E.L.D. I can follow you and do anything for you. As long as you can save me, kill, assassinate, or perform missions. I have been professionally trained and I can do everything. S.H.I.E.L.D. promise me that they can save me, but they have been lying to me. You can leave any insurance on me, even if you put a bomb around my neck. As long as you can save me, I am willing to do anything." Ava emphasized in a few words that she can do everything countless times. This all represents her determination. Even if Eno knows about it, he will tell the S.H.I.E.L.D. like S.H.I.E.L.D. She doesn't want to go back anymore, so she can express her loyalty directly. Although the words are nice, Yi will choose the safest way to control her. Eno smiled and asked faintly, "I'll give you some sweetness first. Do you want to drink some blood?" "What?" Ava was taken aback, and she thought she had misheard. Eno didn't explain any more, but put his right hand to the side and said, "Come here." Ava looked at the direction of Eno's right hand and walked over without hesitation. She has reached this point and can't look back. Walk to Eno's right hand. Ava looks at Eno's right hand. Eno makes her drink blood. Then, because Eno was sitting in the boss chair, she had to kneel down if she wanted to drink blood. After understanding the meaning of this layer, Ava knelt under Eno's wrist, opening her rosy mouth as much as possible. Eno nodded in satisfaction. The left index finger of the knife gently stroked the right wrist. The blood on the right wrist that deliberately did not exert his control ability immediately dripped like a stream. Then it drips into Ava's little mouth. At the moment of contact, Ava's eyes widened suddenly. Because of her inability to move her head, her eyes rolled up to look at Eno. There was disbelief and more desire in those eyes. Eno explained with a smile, "The blood of higher level creatures than you has more powerful nutrients and energy. It can not only strengthen your body, but also restore your physical health. As it is now, the genetic instincts in your body are desperately eager for my blood. It's not bad for you to endure this after drinking it." Eno just finished. Ava stood up abruptly. She held Eno's arms with both hands, put her lips directly on Eno's wrists, and started drinking. Although it seemed impolite, Eno allowed her to cheer up this time. The desire from the genetic level here can make anyone lose their sanity. Angela looked at Ava's appearance and nodded. It succeeded. Just this blood Ava can't do without Eno. Not to mention that after Ava's efforts, Eno may give her more. At this moment, Zhao Hailun also walked out of the elevator in the underground laboratory. As soon as she came out, she saw Ava kneeling on the ground and sucking Eno's wrist sitting in the boss chair. Helen reached out and covered her delicate lips with her little hand. She looked at Angela. Angela nodded. After Helen understood, she put her little hand down. The screen returns to Eno's side. After watching Ava have been drinking for a few minutes, Eno used her ability to instantly heal the wound. Ava, who was sucking her head down, trembled fiercely. Then her hands holding Eno's arms slammed hard. And the strength in her mouth is also greater. She desperately wants to push Eno's wrist with her tongue. But obviously wetting has no effect. Eno looked at her crazy appearance and said lightly, Ava. Ava shook suddenly, slowly let go Eno's right hand. After Eno retracted his right hand, Angela came forward with a wet wipe to wipe his wrist clean. And Ava was still kneeling on the ground. She propped her hands on the floor, panting heavily. I do not know how long it has been. Ava raised her head again, looked at Eno with moist eyes, and then pulled herself up on the desk with her hands. Finally, Ava propped her hands on the desk. After swallowing once, take a big breath, spit out again suddenly. After changing the air in the lungs, Ava felt that she had recovered. She wiped her lips. At that moment I seemed to have gone to heaven. My mind was blank. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what I was doing. But I only know that I seemed to have turned into a beast, desperately pursuing something. This phenomenon of Ava is normal. If she was a normal person, then she wouldn't have such a big reaction to Eno's blood. But the point is that she is not a normal person. The gene cravings brought about by molecular structure come from instinct. If it's an analogy, the elementary level is thirst for you for 2 days to make you see water is far more than this analogy. At a high level, the people in the ring can't match Ava's desire. It's so cruel. Eno shook his hand and continued to press on the table and watched. Ava, who was panting slightly, said, I have more power to heal you. Not only is it a cure, it can even make you heal permanently or become stronger. Hear Eno's words. The lungs that Ava had just gasped stopped breathing. She turned and looked at Eno. He lowered his head and asked, what conditions and tasks? I can perform them now. Eno nodded in satisfaction. This is the kind of on the road. Ava also knows that the current Eno can't save herself casually. But anyhow, compared to S.H.I.E.L.D., saying that Eno can really save yourself. And S.H.I.E.L.D., I always lie to myself. It's nothing, let me control your life now. Eno raised his right hand, and a small semi-solid ball of gold and silver condensed in his palm. That's just the upper level of insurance. Huh. Eno just finished. Ava teleported over and held the ball in her hand. She immediately asked, what can I do to make you rest assured? Eno, it has already started. Next, the semi-solid ball directly turned into a liquid and plunged into Ava's body. Gene phagocytic system, symbiotic host. Angela Ziegler, parasitic host. Zhao Hailun, Ava star Eno commanded in the system. Only the parasite controls life and does not grant any abilities. All permissions have been blocked. All of a sudden, Ava could feel her heart and brain as if they were fused with some kind of existence. And when she looked at Eno in front of her, he is also more eye-catching. Furthermore, Ava also felt that she felt relieved. If even his life is controlled by Eno, he can rest assured himself. Eno looked at Zhao Hailun, who was still in a parasitic state in the system. After thinking about it, she should also be promoted. After all, the internship period should have passed. But the ability will not increase after promotion. It's just a bit more verbal. Gene phagocytic system, symbiosis host. Angela Ziegler, Zhao Hailun, it's gone, that's it. Although it looks like, change the name. But it's not just that simple. This means that Zhao Hailun has gained initial trust. It can also be understood as a shift from employees to senior management. Just like Ava, she can now be understood as a part-time job. Well, I work for a lifetime. After feeling her body, Ava asked, is there any task I want to do now? No doubt. This is what it looks like after finding a good one and eager to behave. Ava is now anxious to show that she gets more and better rewards. But Eno shook his head and said, my bodyguard period is 15 days before you need to perform the mission. Ava reacted, you asked me to go back to S.H.I.E.L.D. to execute. Yes, become a little smarter. After a little compliment, Eno said, I still need you to return to S.H.I.E.L.D. Bureau without incident. Learning, for me, click on the information I need. As for what information it is, this information is really important. Ava immediately asked, what kind of information? Eno shrugged and asked, what is our latest technology product? Nano-neurobiomechanical prostheses. Ava replied immediately. Then do you know the most important words in these 10 words? Eno asked again. Now Ava shook her head. But she still tried to ask, nervous. To be precise, it is a nano-nerve. Eno's importance to Ava's popularization. Neurotechnology has a big future, and so does nano. This is the content of the task I added to you in 15 days. At this moment, Ava looked forward to watching Eno order the mission. Eno went on to say, his name is Animzola, a figure of the same period as Captain America during World War II. He is also the first batch of genetic engineering researchers at Blue Star, and he is also a senior member of Hydra. In 2017, Animzola was diagnosed with cancer, and then he used some unknown technology to output his neurological consciousness into a supercomputer. If it is common sense, there is no computer in the world with the capacity to store the neural consciousness of the human brain. Not to mention the computer back then, he should have some special technology, which is exactly what I need in the future. Ava nodded seemingly. In summary, Eno needs this neuroconscious technology. And Animzola seems to have a bit of special technology. And he lurked to S.H.I.E.L.D. Just get it in, Ava asked. One day later, I returned to S.H.I.E.L.D. as normal. To perform this task, yes, Eno nodded. Then you need to find a reason to go to New Jersey to find a S.H.I.E.L.D. Abandoned secret facility. The location of the secret facility will have a very obvious feature, that is, there is also an underground military ammunition depot. If these two characteristics meet the standards at the same time, then Zola's giant computer is there. Don't disturb it when you find it, just come back and report it to me. Ava nodded. Yes. Eno waved his hand. Go rest and lie down for a while. I just absorbed my blood. Take it easy. Forehead. Ava was stunned, and Eno suddenly became gentle and still didn't react. Immediately she reacted and said, okay. After Ava disappears invisibly, she heads to the lounge. Angela and Helen watched the whole process. Zhao Hailun looked at the direction of her disappearance and muttered, it's really amazing. The molecular structure of human beings can be integrated in this way. There are more amazing things you don't know. Eno couldn't help shaking his head. Ah, there are so many amazing things to hear. Helen couldn't wait for herself to have the technique of multiple shadow clones. This is really the feeling that there are too many treasures to dig. Angela smoothed Helen's hair, and she looked at Helen now as she looked at herself back then. There are too many treasures, although I can't dig them away. But I got used to it later. With Eno, the treasures will only increase. Noon of the day. Tony's birthday party is today. He will invite some celebrities in the industry or friends who have worked with him at home. Tony would happily hold banquets in his previous life. But this time may be different. Eno 3 drove to Tony's Ocean View mansion. Angela and Helen went to Pepper to prepare things first, and went to talk to each other. And Eno and Tony came to the lounge of the mansion. At this time Tony is wearing a black suit, trousers, and a dark red shirt over it. The two each sat on the sofa in the lounge. Eno asked, did Nick Fury contact you? Spiced corned egg. Tony immediately replied, what did he do with me? Then he will contact you in a few days. Eno said, oh no, you can't just talk halfway, it makes me very uncomfortable. Tony complained, how about palladium poisoning? Eno just changed the subject. Tony temporarily took the tester out of his pocket. Then press your thumb up. 7%, not too bad. Tony put a bloody thumb into his mouth. It's lower than I expected. Eno nodded. It was indeed relatively low. Because his medicine worked, Tony is now a little better than before. Look at you. Eno looked at Tony and said, you don't seem to want to open this. Tony shrugged in agreement with Eno's words. It's a little bit, now I want to take a little chili to where to play. Take her to Europe first, then take her to North America or something. But I don't want to let her know that I am going to heaven soon. Eno leaned on the sofa, resting his head on the cushions and looking at the crystal chandelier on the ceiling. A few days ago, I just gave a misstep. Bah, I just gave Ava a whole new life and future. As a result, there is another world in front of me saying goodbye in a short time. At this moment, the door of the lounge was opened sideways by a woman with a hot figure and big red wavy hair. She is wearing a gray long skirt and holding a tray with a few famous watches in the tray. Natasha glanced at Eno without leaving a trace. Then she went to the wine counter and put down the tray. Reached out and took out 2 goblets, and then started to mix Eno and Tony. During the bartending, Natasha asked Tony, which watch do you want to wear tonight? Tony leaned on the sofa like Eno, I'll look at it later. Eno leaned on the sofa and looked straight at Natasha's back figure and curiously said, you can also mix drinks. Hobbies at the time. Natasha shook the cup in her hand and said, and I like to drink too. Eno looked at her as interesting as Angela's figure and said, as the wine you mix now is spicy as your figure. The man sees what's wrong with the woman's figure. Isn't this normal? Although Eno is not on, it's okay to look seductive. Sneak look as the dick silk. Natasha took the cocktail glass and shook it for the last time, then opened it and poured it into 2 goblets. It's all set now, how can I taste it once in person to get a clear taste? Eno smiled, I really don't want to try it with you. Hey, it's not good to communicate like this in front of the boss. This is the voice of Tony who is lying on the sofa in protest. Natasha is holding 2 goblets. She first walked up to Eno and gave him a glass. Then walked to Tony and gave Tony a glass. Eno took a bite. It tasted good, it was really spicy, but it was not spicy enough. After Tony took a sip, his brows trembled. Natasha looked at Tony and then at Eno. Eno said relaxedly to Natasha, it doesn't seem to be spicy, as you not in good shape. My wine is not made from figure. Natasha complained in her heart. But she still smiled at Eno. Tony looked at Eno, and he suddenly asked Natasha with interest, if this is your last birthday, what would you do? Natasha turned around and looked at Tony. She also knew that Tony had been poisoned by palladium, and she would not have his 2nd birthday. She looked into Tony's eyes and said softly, I will do whatever I want. Yes, this Natasha is also a troublemaker. Now Eno is sure. Fairy just said that day to try to stabilize Tony. As a result, Natasha said to the side that you can do whatever you want. This is called steady Tony, a good opinion, I will consider it. Tony said something, but after seeing that Eno had finished drinking, she frowned and drank the wine in 1 sip. Then he said stiffly, it's really not too spicy. Natasha smiled slightly and put Tony's cup away. Then I walked to Eno and put away Eno's cup. After washing the cup and returning, she said at the door, the dial is on the table. I will go out first. The birthday party will start in 15 minutes. After speaking, she took the door and walked out. After watching her go, Tony walked to the floor mirror and unbuttoned his crimson shirt. It is visible to the naked eye. The blood vessels next to the arc reactor in Tony's chest all burst and glowed black. He reached out his hand and felt it and asked, can your thinner be used once every 3 days? I kind of miss that feeling. Screw you. Eno laughed angrily. You treat it as an addictive thing, I'll say it first, thinners and special medicines don't have this thing. I just like that feeling better. Tony smiled and tied his shirt to his basement. I'm going to wear Mark's armor first, and I will come over later. After a while, Tony walked over in a red and yellow Mark armor. He covered his face and said to Eno, let's go to the final. Eno stood up and went with Tony. As soon as Tony arrived in the lobby of the house. Oh, the crowd that Tony invited over saw Iron Man stepping out and cheered. The electric sounds in the hall also began to play with explosive rhythms. Tony walked to the side and patted him on the shoulder and said, change to the best one. In an instant, the atmosphere in the banquet hall exploded and became alive. Eno took a look, took a glass of wine and walked to Tony's side and touched a glass with him and said, I don't like these, I will go out after drinking this glass. It's over in an hour, remember not to get drunk crazy. Tony touched Eno with the wine glass and replied, that's a shame. But I shouldn't be able to do this thing about getting drunk, because I drink well. Eno ignored him and drank the wine in the glass. Then put the goblet on the bar, turned around and walked upstairs. Pepper and Angela, Helen, and Ava are there. Ava is invisible and will not be a problem. When I came to the living room on the 2nd floor, it was relatively empty, and most of it was a place with good light and rest during the day. But Pepper doesn't seem to be here, only Angela and Helen are here. Angela saw Eno and explained. Pepper went back to her room to rest in anger. Eno nodded. This is also normal. At the moment when social speech and government pressure are so serious, Tony is actually open, which makes Pepper, who was just angry at Tony, even more angry at her at this time. He is not enterprising. Eno is on the sofa, leaning against the sofa behind Angela and Helen by the shoulders. Tony said he will only hold this birthday party for an hour and a half. He won't only drive for an hour and a half, right? Helen questioned. Look, now even Helen knows Tony's character. After getting drunk, Tony will definitely do something to relieve stress under the pressure of life and palladium poisoning. But Eno shook his head gently. No, I said he only had 1.5 hours, and he would be 1.5 hours. Helen was taken aback for a moment, and then he realized what was going on. Angela thought for a while and asked in Eno's ear, Ava can attack Tony directly through his armor. Eno nodded. Oh, titanium alloy can't stop molecules from passing through, so Ava tank Iron Man. Not to mention that Ava is invisible. Tony is not equipped with a thermal imaging scanning device in the armor. If Eno uses his sub-abilities to overpower Ava, then even if Tony puts thermal imaging on it, it's useless, and even electricity is useless. Here Eno complimenting himself. Ava stood invisible behind the three of them, very happy. This is actually Eno's back method to prevent Tony from being irritable. It's stunned directly. What nonsense. Anyway, no one knows. Helen heard Eno's words and looked back at Ava, who was hiding behind him. Ava smiled at Helen in stealth. Angela and Helen have a look at the relationship between Eno and Ava to understand. If you don't please the two of them, who can you please? At this moment, Nick Fury's call came in. After Eno connected, Fury asked directly, why don't Tony drive to stop? According to Tony's current situation, are you really his best friend? At this time, the news that Tony had officially opened reached Fury's ears. Originally, Fury thought that Eno would stop it, so he didn't care. But who knows that Natasha's news is that Tony opened it. And Eno hasn't stopped it. He even attended Tony's birthday party, which Fury couldn't bear, so there was the question of this time. Eno faintly replied, does other people's lives have to be pointed out? Tony's birthday party was wrong, yes, I admit it. But do you want me to tell Tony, hey, anyway, you're going to die, go to a place to stay honestly, don't cause trouble to society anymore? Should I say that? Then why am I here? Come and participate. Don't you know that I don't like it? How did you investigate? As he talked, Eno became more angry, and finally said directly, I tell you, I came to be a cordon. Once Tony makes an extraordinary behavior, I will stop him immediately, understand? As a friend, I am his last insurance. Not a babysitter who urinates. If Tony has reached 95 in palladium poisoning and there is no way, I will force him to take it to the hospital at the Umbrella headquarters and let Stephen Strange be the chief surgeon. I can still tell you. I have the permission to use his Mark's battle armor, none of you have it. After speaking, Eno hung up the phone fiercely. If it were not for good quality, Eno would really want to drop the phone. It's been so long since Rebirth. Whoever takes himself seriously, he will also take him seriously. You can understand that Eno is a force of chaos neutral. But there is a bit of order in it. Tony said that there was nothing wrong with Eno. But Eno really didn't help him with mutual benefit, and mutual benefit is king. Fry actually wants Eno to be a licking dog and give you SHIELDELD tomorrow. Exploded, seeing Eno hang up fiercely. Ava squeezed her fists behind him. Although she has no hatred for Fury. But she was against S.H.I.E.L.D. This organization has hatred. Seeing Eno being so angry, Ava became angry too. After a while, Eno could not help but feel the anger of the two small hands that followed him in front of him and smiled. It's alright, it's gone, it's gone, it's gone, don't let it go. Here Eno changing back again. Angela and Helen took back the little hand that had just been comforted in front of Eno's chest and abdomen. At this time, there is another, uninvited guest. Came to Tony's house. He has black cheeks and a thin face. But overall it has a funny style. Roddy passed by the ballroom on the first floor, glanced at Tony who was carving, and then quickly walked upstairs. He also asked why Eno didn't stop Tony. Eno looked at the man walking in front of him in a leather jacket with his hands on his hips and asked, "How do I feel that you want to hit me?" "No, no, 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 no." All of a sudden, Lieutenant Colonel Roddy stretched out his hand and shook it around. He walked to the side of the sofa and sat down. He looked at Eno, who was hugging left and right, and said, "You should stop Tony. He is creating chaos. It is difficult for the military and the people to explain. Do you know that for Tony, Shield and I, it abruptly held back the government's idea of bringing the tank over and snatching Tony's steel armor. And he's actually doing this here, and he feels so indifferent." Eno nodded helplessly, then raised his arm around Helen's left hand and glanced at the time of the watch and said, "Minutes ago, Nick Fury said the same when he called. It's just that what he said seemed to be a bit harsher, which made me angry." Etc., etc. Lieutenant Colonel Roddy quickly interrupted. "I am different from him, I am not here to annoy you." Roddy's heart is going crazy. So Nick Fury still has the guts to make Eno angry. But a small lieutenant colonel himself provokes even the soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel Roddy tried his best to calmly cooperate with the gesture and said, "Tony is creating a chaos that is obvious to the society and the government. And you, the best friend he announced, need you to organize Tony's carnival. You can't let him go on like this. If he goes on like this, things will directly become out of control. The result we can't predict, and it will be very, very bad." Eno nodded and continued to reply. "1 hour ago, I also went back to Nick Fury, the answer I wanted to tell you. But I don't want to say it a second time now, you can wait, let me see." Eno raised his left hand again to look at the time and said, "Can you wait for Tony's beam to act or speak again? It's about 45 minutes. In between, I don't want to talk to others." Roddy was taken aback. He immediately scratched his hair impatiently and looked at Eno and asked, "Do you think Tony will end in 45 minutes? If he can finish after 45 minutes, he won't use it. We can just announce that Tony just ended his birthday after 1.5 hours. But he is wearing a steel suit, how can we explain it?" Eno didn't even look at him at this time. He just raised his head and leaned on the back of the sofa to look at the ceiling. Then he embraced Helen with his left arm, and Angela with his right arm. There is also an Ava that Roddy can't see behind. Obviously this means not waiting. Going to Tony in 4 minutes. Roddy immediately got up and stopped pacing back and forth after understanding. After walking, I don't know how many laps, Roddy sat down on the sofa. He watched Eno say the last sentence. "I see if you are Tony a real friend or a fake friend." Eno didn't move his head, but he put his arm around Helen's hand and waved. "It means it's as you wish." The screen came to S.H.I.E.L.D. The Sanchu Wing building of the headquarters. Nick Fury was just hung up by Eno dozens of minutes ago. He looked at the phone that made the blind tone, then looked at Hill. Hill shrugged and said, "Don't look at me, I can't control it." Fury put the phone on the table. He turned to look at the starry sky outside the window with a serious expression. What is Eno's low-level character and how does he do things? Even now we even doubt whether he is good or bad for Tony. This is too far from the definition we set up 2 years ago. At the time, we thought he was harmless Eno. Maybe, there is nothing else if you manage your umbrella better. But now, speaking of this, Nick Fury shook his head gravely. The 2-year Eno and the current Eno are one sky and one earth. But you can still tell that he is Eno. It hasn't changed. The only thing Nick Fury knows from start to finish is that he will never guess what Eno is doing. At this time, Hill next to him continued. The agents of the Intelligence Center analyzed Eno's work style and psychology, personality, habits, etc. But what we get is always what he has a chance to do, without foreseeing. At last, both of them looked at the night starry sky outside the window and sighed heavily. Too difficult. In minutes. Roddy doesn't know how many times he has gone down to see Tony who is going crazy. He finally walked up this time and said, "Hey, 45 minutes has come, it's time for you to stop Tony." When Eno heard it, he held Angela and Helen's hands and slightly pulled himself up. Then they patted the shoulders of the two of you, indicating that you can sit down and stand up. When passing a 2-person wide spiral staircase, Roddy involuntarily stepped aside and stood sideways to give Eno a more comfortable space for him to go down. This feeling is like meeting the president. Ava went invisible and followed Eno. When Eno came to the first floor, he heard the explosive electric sound and the colorful lights in the birthday banquet hall. On the dance floor, a group of exposed women and some men in suits twisted their bodies to the music. In this environment, Eno basically sees and walks once. When Tony saw Eno coming down, he walked to the side and took the microphone and said, "Look who is here. My best friend Eno." Oh. Dozens of people on the dance floor followed Tony and screamed. Many women of all kinds kept winking at Eno next to the stairs. I am afraid that even if Eno drags them out now, they will applaud with love. But Eno couldn't help but shook his arms and leaned on the spiral staircase, and said faintly, "Tony, 1.5 hours is over, you should take off this armor and go to sleep." "Oh no," Tony said regretfully with a drunken voice. "Come on for another half an hour, I want to be high until tomorrow morning." Eno is still leaning on the spiral staircase. "Do you want me to fight with you in Mark's armor?" At this time, Lieutenant Colonel Roddy had just walked down. He was shocked when he heard Eno's words. Wouldn't it really be a fight? That's a big news. At this moment, Tony was suddenly excited when he heard it. Really? How do I feel? I am a little looking forward to this feeling. Kong busy, you go put on the steel armor, let's fight. Now the two exciting Iron Man battles begin. Oh, as soon as Tony finished speaking, the crowd on the dance floor screamed with excitement. Of course, they don't think it is too big, they hope that the more they are, the better. Seeing this, Eno shook his head, then raised his chin to indicate something. But this is actually asking Ava to go up and stun Tony. However, this is different in Roddy's eyes. He suddenly stepped forward and asked, Hey, you don't really want to put on your armor to fight Tony, right? Do you know what the consequences will be if you really fight? The government will." Boom. There was a sound of heavy objects falling to the ground. The stage at this time suddenly became silent, only the electronic sound was still there, sounded. Natasha, who was far away, saw the situation inside, suddenly lifted up in surprise and wanted to go to Tony. Natasha thought that Tony Palladium was poisoned to the limit. At the same time, she hurried to S.H.I.E.L.D. Bureau. Director Fury, Tony fell suddenly, I'm going to check the situation. After that, Roddy turned around and looked for Fame. A red-yellow figure waited on the ground with a wine bottle and microphone. His visor is still open. Tony closed his eyes with a calm expression. Roddy turned around to look at Eno. Without saying anything, Eno walked directly to Tony without talking nonsense with him. Roddy reacted all of a sudden and hurried to Tony. And the crowd on the dance floor saw this situation and all fled in shock. They don't want to be taken with the news of Tony's death in front of them. Natasha stopped after seeing Lieutenant Colonel Eno and Roddy running over. Then she recovered as Tony's secretary of the legal department and hurried over. At this point, Ava has come to Eno's body. Invisible, she nodded to Eno and said that the mission was completed perfectly. Lieutenant Colonel Roddy walked to Tony and looked at Tony, who was lying on the board. He put 2 fingers together and reached inside Tony, pressing on his neck to feel the beating of blood vessels. After a few seconds, Roddy let out a sigh of relief and looked at Eno and Natasha in front of him and said, It should be okay, he seems to have fainted and fell asleep. Eno went on to say next to him, It may be a stress response caused by too much excitement. Natasha nodded when she was sure. She got up and walked to the second floor and said, I'll report to Miss Pepper, she needs to know about this. But in the middle of the second floor, she sent another message to Fury again. Tony was okay, but fell asleep after fainting. At this time, Nick Fury, who was far away in the Tri-Wing building, was relieved. At the same time he decided to go to Tony tomorrow. After a while, Pepper came down from the second floor. She looked at the chaotic first floor hall and Tony lying on the ground with silent surprise. But after a while she still ran to Tony. How is Tony? For the first time, Pepper still asked the most assured Eno directly. Eno simply explained. It may be that he fell asleep again after fainting too much, but overall there is no problem. That's good. Pepper suddenly exhaled in relief. If Tony left like this, she doesn't know what to do in the future. Eno looked at the messy dance floor and the entire first hallway. You may have to find a cleaning company. Pepper was relieved and nodded easily. Then she said, Tony's armor in this state should be taken off, do we want to move him to the bed? And many more. Eno immediately stopped what Pepper wanted to do and explained, his armor is very heavy, and the gold titanium alloy material can't be moved by us. And besides, Tony came out voluntarily, his armor needs an automatic manipulator to unlock it. Pepper looked at Tony lying on the ground and asked, should you put him here to sleep? Otherwise, what else can I do? Eno is helpless, but Roddy seemed a little unbelieving. He walked behind Tony's head, and then tucked his hands behind Tony's shoulders. The muscles in Roddy's sleeves burst with force. Then he didn't move. Roddy immediately let go of Tony, and he explained to Pepper and Eno, who looked at him like a fool, I just want to touch Tony's back if there is anything, hidden switch. Regardless of this fool, Eno looked at his watch. 2. Eno said to Pepper, Tony, just throw it away. The comfort in the armor is very high. Angela and Helen and I will go back first, and we will talk tomorrow. Pepper reacted at this point and quickly replied, thank you for coming to Tony's birthday party, although the result is not very good. Don't worry about this, we will go back first. After Eno finished speaking, he went upstairs and asked Angela and Helen to drive back. And Roddy looked at Tony lying on the ground. Then I looked at Pepper, who had just returned from Eno. He also feels that this is not so good here. Roddy also said, I will go back first, and I will talk about the rest until Tony wakes up. Pepper can only do a little bit. Angela drove a 4-seater on the quiet highway in the middle of the night. Eno sits in the back row and Helen sits in the co-pilot. And Ava was sitting hidden on the back cover of the convertible, blowing the hula wind. At this time, she felt that she was really lucky to follow this new one. Can live, can become stronger, as long as the task is done well, it is easy and free. And the boss is so handsome, compared to the gloomy Shield. Bureau. Secret underground base. She felt that Eno's feet were better than Shield. The organization is countless times taller. Sitting in the back seat, Eno knocked on Jiro's leg and asked, how does it feel to stun Tony Stark, Iron Man? Ava's legs swayed beside Eno and replied, it doesn't feel anything, it's just the neck of an ordinary person. The only way to stop Tony from going crazy and not affecting Tony is to come over to his party and stun him. And knocking him out has no effect. After returning home, Ava was placed in the same auxiliary room as Zhao Hailun. And she can only live for half a month, because she will return to S.H.I.E.L.D. The next day, Ava still acts as a bodyguard in stealth and followed Eno to the Umbrella building for a total of 4. As soon as Angela and Helen got to the top office, they took the elevator to the laboratory together. They still have a lot to be busy. But Eno always takes them out to play. This boss is too disgusting. Eno was sitting on the boss chair. Then she put the cup on Eno's table and stood behind him. Eno looked at the milk tea that suddenly appeared on the table. He smiled and said to Ava behind him, it's okay to be casual when there is no one, and talk about it when someone is invisible. He is not a rigid person. There are only 2 people in the entire office. He wants Ava to stand behind him all day and hear Eno's words. Eno looked at her and called the front desk, get one of the best phones here. Ava only has an agent phone. If you don't have a mobile phone for pastime, Eno feels too bad. After a while, a lady at the front desk respectfully opened the door and brought up a brand new mobile phone. And Ava had been invisible long before. Eno picked up the box on the phone table and threw it directly at Ava. Go to the lounge and get familiar with the environment outside, now there is no need for bodyguards. Ava nodded and walked out incognito with the phone case. After that, Eno handled daily official duties normally. Time came to noon. The umbrella came to someone who Eno didn't expect. Eno looked at the sloppy man who was sleepy in front of him and asked, Tony, do you have too much time to panic, and the house is so messed up to help you come to me? There is a cleaning company cleaning at home. He rubbed his eyes and walked to the sofa and lay down. He tilted his body comfortably. I'm talking about chaos in the government and society. Tony lay on the sofa, with his hands under his head as if he was going to fall asleep and replied, according to my personality, it will only cause trouble. It's better to find a place to stay. You found it too. Eno grumbled inwardly. But after a while, Tony turned over and lay face up with his hands on the back of his head on the sofa and asked, what did I do yesterday? Jarvis said I almost had a fight with you. How did I fall asleep? Yes, that's right. Eno nodded. You had a fight with me, and I was beaten to the ground. Fart, I fainted, Little Chili told me. Eno just thought that Tony really didn't know anything. In the end, Tony still knows part of it. Tony. Suddenly, Eno looked at him seriously after speaking. Tony turned his head and shook his shoulders to indicate that he was listening. Eno continued. When your palladium poisoning reaches 95%, I will take you to the hospital for surgery. I know, your tester says it will not die immediately after reaching 100%. But if it reaches 100%, it will enter a state of unrecoverable physical damage. This thing is certain, Tony's tester reaching 100% just means that from now on, palladium element poisoning can cause the whole body's toxicity to restore the state. But he won't die right away. But it also means death and not far from death. But Tony shook his head with a heavy face. Eno, you know what kind of person I am. I can't solve this problem. I would rather. Then you are worthy. Little Chili. Eno directly interrupted and asked, do you know how much Pepper has endured for you in the past 10 years? How many times did she do it for you? Do you know that your current behavior is irresponsible to her? Yes, now you can say that you are worthy of the 3 words Iron Man. But you are worthy, Tony Stark and Pepper Potts. Tony, people can change. When you die, there is nothing, and nothing can be changed. Facing Eno's multiple soul tortures, Tony rolled over and buried his face in the sofa. I don't know how long it took. Eno kept looking at Tony's back waiting for his answer. After a while, Tony groaned buried in the sofa. If I really reach 95, please stun. I will force me to tie me up. Get up. Go for surgery. And you have to make a video, just say that I was forced to undergo surgery. I can't resist this process at all. It's better to be tough on me. Pouch. Listen to the words that emphasize the voice before the words are cruel. Eno was successfully amused by Tony's operation. So this is the last dignity of your genius. I have no idea. Tony started doing it all of a sudden. He looked at Eno, lost. Said, what happened just now? Am I still awake and talked in a dream? Eno smiled and picked up a pen in his hand and said, you said you want to give Stark Industries to me. Screw you. Tony stood up and walked to the coffee machine while pouring coffee and said, that's for Pepper. At this moment, a phone call from the lady at the front desk suddenly called. The last time, the black one who only came here with a blindfold that looked like a marinated egg has only been here once again. The document presented is the department you reminded, but he also asked to bring the box he brought up. And behind him was Mr. Coulson and a woman registered as Natasha Romanoff. Eno said directly, let them come up. And downstairs, the first time Fury heard the name Braised Egg, it was actually said by the lady at the front desk of the Umbrella. He took a deep look at the front desk lady. Then she took the chip she handed over and carried the box and Collison, and Natasha walked to the elevator to the top floor. As the elevator went up, Natasha's mouth kept holding a smile. Marinated eggs, it was the first time she heard such a comparison of Director Ferry. The drop elevator reaches the top of the Umbrella building. Ferry, Collison, and Natasha 3 walked into Eno's super large office floor. But as soon as I walked in, I could see that there was a steel armor standing beside Eno's desk. And Tony was sleeping on the sofa. Didn't he drive over here? The intelligence center didn't show that Tony was wearing a steel war. A is here. Eno found Fury staring at the steel armor next to the bookcase behind him, and explained, this was given to me by Tony. Fury. This is so amazing that Fury will immediately question Tony lying on the sofa with bell-like eyes. Tony glanced at Fury's Trio 3 and suddenly realized something was wrong, but he explained, yes, I gave it to Eno. But it didn't wait for Fury to reply. Tony lay back on the sofa and pointed at Natasha and said, you have been fired. Natasha. I was fired again. But why should I say again? This is not Tony, you decide. Fury said a little depressed voice and then took the suitcase and walked to the sofa next to Tony to sit down. Natasha will continue to stay at your Stark Industrial supervisor for what you do. Tony said indifferently, I think it would be better for you to ask her to apologize to me first. I'm sorry, Mr. Stark. As soon as Tony finished speaking, Natalie immediately replied. Just an apology. Anyway, just stay in Stark Industries. Tony closed his eyes and fell silent after hearing the apology, as if he was about to fall asleep. Fury sat on the sofa and looked at Tony and said, "The news I got in the morning is, as soon as you wake up, run to the umbrella. What are you doing here? Continue the fight you didn't fight last night." Tony closed his eyes and replied, "Come to Eno to confess my life and reflect on what I did. Then I have to decide some things and change my life thinking." "Then you did it." Fury 100 do not believe that Tony can do this. For Tony's character, he and Fairy were on the spot. Tony. Done. On the spot. Just ask you if you did it. Fury looked back at Eno, then turned back to look at Tony and said, "What have you done and changed?" Tony doesn't reply now. He definitely doesn't want to say what he said just now. Seeing Tony who didn't speak for a moment, Fury looked back at Eno abruptly. The look in his eyes seemed to say, "What the hell did you say to Tony? What happened to him? Oh." Eno sighed and explained to Fury, "Tony just promised me that the palladium poisoning reached 95 and he would go to surgery with me. Wait for me to correct it." As soon as Eno finished speaking, Tony flipped up and said, "I will be tied up for surgery after I reach 95. I am forced, not voluntary." After finishing speaking, he is still quite serious. The eyes staring at Fury nodded heavily. Fury smiled happily. Yes, the king of agents really smiled. He looked at Eno and laughed and said, "Hey, Iron Man will be kidnapped by mortals, I really believe it. In fact, all my steel armors are broken." Tony looked at Fury seriously. "You have to believe me. Believe in you to have a ghost." Fury complained inwardly. But Tony can actually promise Eno the last time to save himself. This is something Fury didn't expect. Originally, he planned to use coercive measures. But I didn't expect Eno to verbally let Tony accept this condition. Fury nodded in satisfaction and said to Tony, "Actually, I am looking for you this time for more than this." Tony looked at him questioningly. Fury took the suitcase on the ground, then pushed it in front of Tony and said, "This is what your father Howard Stark left for you, and he can help you solve the problem of palladium poisoning." "My father?" Tony questioned. "He will leave me something to solve this problem." Etc., etc. Tony said quickly, "Do you understand my current problem? My main problem is not palladium element poisoning, but the elemental problem that causes palladium element poisoning. If I solve the new element problem, will I still be poisoned by palladium? And my father's time can leave me to solve modern problems. My question is the new element, and it is the element that can be replaced. Now I have tried all the elements, there is no one that can replace my chest." Fury pursed his lips to Tony and shook his head gently. Then he looked back at Eno, who was dealing with official duties. Tony immediately said after seeing it, "You can just say it, Eno can listen." Fury nodded. "I also showed you the information about the person you met in Monaco and the father of that person. But you may not know the history at that time, now I will tell you in detail." Fury straightened his body, then leaned on the back of the sofa and said formally, "Your father was going to start a competence competition that year. He would have left all his opponents behind. He fumbled for a super energy clue. The nuclear reactor is like a three-pool relative to the bottom. Ivan Vanki's father was also expelled from the United States by your father at that time." Tony nodded, got up and walked to the coffee machine where he poured a cup of coffee and asked, "What about then?" Fury got used to Tony like this and continued, "That is the discovery of new elements brought about by new energy, and it was discovered decades ago." As soon as he said this, Tony put the coffee he was holding on the table in front of the sofa and asked, "The new element was discovered decades ago, you are sure?" "Determined," Fury affirmed, "but limited to the technology and resources at the time, your father was just the beginning. When he saw the road to the future, he was closed by a door. But he said that only you will have the resources and wisdom to realize his discovery and complete the plan it just started." "He said so." Tony still asked, "My father will leave me so many things. You know what he didn't care about since he was a kid? Me, and I'm very strict. I was sent to boarding school when I was very young. He never said he liked me. You think he will leave me so many things?" "Yes, Tony." At this time, Eno interrupted Tony directly. Eno asked back, if you become a father, will you spoil your child or temper your child? Do you think the crying on the social road is bigger or the crying on the growth road? Not to mention a rich kid like you, and it's the top class. Tony looked at Eno, then he looked at Fury again. Nick Fury nodded seriously at him. Tony lowered his head to meditate, and after a while, he raised his head. I will try, after all it is my thing now. Certainly. Nick Fury pushed the suitcase in front of Tony. Tony opened it in front of everyone without saying a word. He doesn't believe that things that can solve his troubles are so easily placed in front of him. That's why Tony dared to open it directly. After opening, there are several drawings and a blueprint inside. There are also some videotapes, and a few notepads and the like. Tony spread his hands to Fury, and that's all, but Fury didn't care about it and said directly, I'm only responsible for handing over things to you, I don't care about everything else. With that said, Fury looked at his watch and said, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. 2, I have another appointment, now I am leaving. After talking about Nick Fury, he took Collison and Natasha away. After watching him go, Tony turned his head to Eno and asked, do you have a machine here to play these videotapes? No, Eno said. Okay. Tony closed the box. It looks like I have to wait until I go back to see it. Eno looked at the computer and didn't raise his head and said, you should also go back. You have been hiding from Pepper for so long, and you won't take care of the company's affairs. Tony nodded and walked away with the suitcase. After seeing Tony finally go, Ava appeared from behind. She questioned, will Tony Stark die? Will not. Eno continues processing. Ava is actually thinking about the events Tony experienced. From what she had learned in the past few days, she also knew that this man whose life was several times shorter than her own since the invention of the steel armor. Ava also thought about what this situation would look like when she replaced Tony. From the recent understanding, Tony was really crazy. But he is pretty good. Compared to herself, Ava is more fortunate that she has met a good one. Don't need to be like Tony, even if he rescued himself, he went through a lot of hardships. At this time, Eno saw a news on the internet. Hammer Industries and the military have reached the latest cooperation, and it is suspected that the new steel armor unit will be announced the night after tomorrow. This is undoubtedly the steel armor developed by Venki to help Justin Hammer. But the steel armor is bloated and has a single weapon. It was incomparable with the steel armor next to the bookcase behind Eno. Not to mention Tony's 6th-generation infrared laser knife battle armor a few days later. Time comes tonight. Zhao Hailun, Angela, Ava, and Eno 4 were all lying on the rocking chairs in the courtyard of the luxury villa swaying. This kind of chair with the lower legs after the 2 sleds are bent is rocking chair. Anyway, you can shake it with just force. At this time, Zhao Hailun suddenly asked, what will the flower of the god of heaven look like when its roots reach the center of the earth? Nothing. What? Eno gave Helen a helpless look. Didn't I say that flower roots are just an expression of consciousness? There is no change before or after control. It's just that I can use the energy of the blue star's core in the future. It can also use the blue star's surface to collect the thermal radiation energy emitted by the sun's stars and store it in the Earth's core. There is also wind, thunder, fire, etc. All the energy caused by it can be collected. For a moment, Helen, Angela, and Ava were all lying on the rocking chair and looking at Eno. The expressions in their eyes seemed to be asking, you just call it. At this moment, Ava seems to have broken his fingers next to him and counted, how much energy is collected in this second. This doesn't seem to be counted, how should this be counted? When he encountered this problem, he also thought about it. It should, probably, maybe the energy collected in 1 second can be used by Blue Star for 200 million years in the world. Of course, this still depends on the conversion efficiency. I can't collect it with all my strength, otherwise the Blue Star people will die. If he collects energy with all his strength, not only he couldn't do it at that time, but even if he could collect it with all his strength. In the case of full power, the blue star directly becomes an oven star, all the liquid evaporates, and all the organisms are carbonized after heat death. 200 million years. Helen, Angela and Ava all expressed emotion. Regardless of how much can be collected by then, but it is impossible to imagine 200 million years after collecting it with all its strength. But, who knows what it will be like then. Gradually the sky became late. Everyone went back to rest. The next day, 6 o'clock in the morning. Eno got bad news from Tony at home. Tony, who had stayed up all night, said tiredly on the phone, "Eno, my father seems to have left me nothing. I have seen everything, but there is no useful news. Come to my house. Come on." Eno thought for a while. "Well, I will go now. I ran to see you at 6 o'clock in the morning for you." Regardless of Tony's current situation, the relationship is generally afraid that it will not be possible. Of course, Tony is in a hurry now. So it has nothing to do with the above conditions. Eno uses his power to transform his clothes. Angela opened her eyes dazedly and looked at Eno. Eno got up and said, "The time I went to Tony, you don't need to get up, I'll let the red umbrella take me over." Angela's little head nodded, then took Eno's pillow and clamped it and fell asleep again. When I arrived at the door of the villa, the red umbrella that Eno had just ordered had brought the car over. A member got off the car, he opened the rear door and waited for Eno to enter before sitting in the driver's seat. Drive all the way to Tony's house. After Eno asked Red Umbrella to drive the car back, he entered Tony's house almost unimpeded. Then came to his underground laboratory. That can also be understood as a modified supercar parking lot. The door of the underground laboratory on the negative floor is not closed. Eno walked directly in. At this time Tony is sitting on a brand new vintage car. There is also a gray notebook beside him. After Tony saw Eno coming, he patted the cushion of the classic car next to him. As soon as Eno walked over and sat down, Tony threw the notebook over. The above is usually my father's research notes, but there is nothing, it is already old-fashioned technology. Eno flipped over the notebook casually and asked, "Did you watch the video?" "Look." Tony leaned his head back on the cushion and said, "There is nothing, except for his affectionate speech in the back. The front is the same as what we played at the New York Expo." "Affectionate speech behind?" Eno questioned. Tony didn't speak tiredly, but directly reached out to turn on the projector next to the car. The projector emits a burst of light. Then the curtain in front of the classic car began to play the exclusive video of Howard Stark to Tony. Cough cough. At this moment, Tony coughed suddenly. He has a bad face. I ran out of palladium block. Tony said with a pale and green face. Eno opened the car door and went down to put his cigar box. Take it. At the same time, he also took the special medicine that Tony had brewed all night. Tony takes over the cigar box. After opening, he took out a brand new palladium block from inside. Then Tony took out his arc reactor again. Snorted. The arc's reactor chamber spit out the wreckage that had been completed. Wait for the white smoke to finish. Tony put the new palladium block in again. Then he put the arc on his chest. Crocodile who Tony raised his head and took a few deep breaths. Then he picked up the soaked special potion and took a few sips and looked at Eno and asked, "Doesn't I look like an ointment just now?" "What?" Eno instantly got goosebumps and said, "You are disgusting." Tony chuckled twice, after joking. The two watched the exclusive video of Tony his father left him together. After the normal speech session, Howard Stark opened a, "Now start patting my ass." After joking, he started talking about business. In the video, Tony's father stared at Tony deeply as if through like time. Howard Stark said solemnly, "Tony, you are too young to understand now, so I will take this video for you first." With that said, Tony's father gestured with his hand and said, "This is all made for you." At the same time, the camera began to capture the details of the future city. One day you will understand that this represents more than a human invention. It is also my life's achievement, and it is the key to the future. I am limited by the technology of this era, but one day you will understand all this. At that time you will change the world. My greatest creation will always be only you. At this point, the videotape is over. Tony stretched out his hand and gestured. What he said is really sensational, but what he built is just a future city module. And now it is not even a future city, it can only be said to be a general park. Eno put his elbows on his thighs, his palms propped his chin for a moment. What do you think he said? He only talked about the city module. Tony drank the special medicine and said, "This special medicine has been soaked a lot, so I have to drink it slowly." But Eno asked, "Are you still in that city module?" Tony drank the medicine and nodded. "Then why don't you take a look and build a digital model? Don't you think it is it a bit regular? It seems like something sudden." Tony's action of drinking the special medicine. He quickly turned on the projector again, and then jumped to the part where the details of the future city were shot. Tony looks more and more alike, and looks more energetic. He slammed the cup over and placed it in the middle cup slot, then pushed the projector next to it away. Turn the switch of a classic car that has been plugged in for several years. Boom! The engine of the classic car immediately started making a sound. Hey, this old car can still drive. Eno quickly put the seat belt on. He won't drive and fall apart. Except for the appearance, the inside of it has long been transformed by me. Tony finished. Block and hang. One turn of the steering wheel. Step on the accelerator. The acceleration of the sprint directly brought Eno close to the cushion. Tony drifted out of the underground garage with a kick of the accelerator. When the black and gold classic cars were at a speed of more than 130 kilometers per hour, there was no one on the highway. All passing vehicles were dumbfounded. This is a classic car of the last century, I am not mistaken. Is it still here? Pepper, who is sleeping on the second floor, has just been awakened by the roar of the engine. When she woke up, she rubbed her sleepy eyes and went to the basement to find Tony. "Tony, what are you doing?" At this time, the underground garage was in a mess. Drawings and light things were blown everywhere, and only 4 black deep tire marks were left on the ground. Chapter 91. Galloping all the way. Tony drove the car and drove through the number of traffic lights before arriving at the Stark Industrial Building. After getting off the bus, the two came to Tony's office on the top floor through various access controls. After entering the office, the two looked to the right together. Leaning against the wall there is the future city module left by Tony's father. Tony looked at Eno. "Go straight up and open the cover first." Then Tony took a few steps back and watched this large module from a wider perspective. After watching it for a while, Tony's gasping voice got heavier and harder. He looked back at Eno, then nodded heavily and said excitedly, "Take it apart." After half an hour, still that color, or that style. The old black and gold car was racing on the highway again. But the difference is, this time, the classic car still carries a few big boards on the back seat. After driving home quickly, Tony drove the car into the underground parking garage. Then again and again to divide by 2 to reinstall the dismantled board. Tony controlled the smart voice device and said, "Jarvis, make it a digital model, I need an operable projection screen." As Tony finished speaking, a spectral scan swept over the city of the future. Tony looked at Eno while waiting for the scan and said, "This is the set I wanted to give you, but you don't want it, do you regret it now?" "Regret?" Eno smiled and shook his head and walked to the side to sit down. "If I regret, I will ask you if I want to. I don't have a personality like you. I have such a great character." Tony touched his mouth and took the next sentence shamelessly. At this time, the digital model of the Jarvis spectral scan has been completed. Tony raised his hands falsely and picked up the digital model. Then he carried the virtual model to Eno and sat down, put the model aside. "Jarvis, get rid of all the buildings." "Jarvis, does it include the Belgian muffin stall?" "Take it out first. Wait until Jarvis removes these." Tony set up the digital model between himself and Eno. Tony sat on the sofa. He pinched his chin and looked at the silhouette next to the ball in the middle of the model and asked Eno, "What does it look like?" "According to my professional knowledge, it is a bit like an atom that is also in the human body." Then Eno pointed to the ball in the middle of the outline and continued, "In this case, that, like an atomic nucleus." Tony nodded. "That's right." Then Tony made a few gestures with his hands next to the digital model. "Highlight the earth of this nucleus. Remove all the streets again. Then there are landscapes, bushes, trees, parking lots, exit, entrance, all remove." Tony said while manipulating the model with his hands. But after a while, he fell into contemplation again. He doesn't know how to improve this model. Tony couldn't help but looked at Eno, as if he was asking for help. Eno thought for a while and said, "It seems that the unit that makes up an atom is more than the nucleus. Where did your protons and neutrons go?" Snap. Tony clenched a fist with his left hand and slammed the palm of his right hand. He pointed to Ino and happily hammered his own chest and turned his head and continued to manipulate the model and said, using the pavilion as a structure to form protons and neutrons. With the last command, Jarvis began to simulate the atomic structure. Tony sat on the sofa and clenched his fists a little nervously. After all, this is related to his life. Victory or defeat in one fell swoop. After a while, Jarvis is built. Sir, congratulations on your discovery of a new element. It should be able to replace your palladium element. Tony looked at the new element in front of him and exhaled heavily from his lungs. He suddenly magnified the new element. Then zoom out and hold it in your hand. Tony looked at Ino. He held the element simulation model in his hand and smiled angrily. My father has been dead for 20 years and he still has to teach me a lesson today. Also, who can think that the new element model is actually related to a broken city model? If it weren't for Ino to remind me today, would I find it to death? Jarvis, sir, it's a pity that we can't synthesize it with the new elements of technology. That's impossible for normal people to synthesize. Tony stood up happily. And I have a special way. It's time to sweat profusely. After watching the whole process, Ino also stood up and gave birth to a lazy waste and said, Congratulations Tony, you have discovered a new element. Tony pouted looking at Ino. I don't like your reaction so much, why are you not shocked at all? Ino pursed his lips helplessly. Since you met me, have you found that I have been shocked? Tony thought for a while, and never knew where to get a hammer after nodding. I look at this wall and I'm upset, I'm going to hammer it. Quote. Bang, bang, bang. Poor Pepper. One Xiaoqian was awakened by the sound of Tony's door. Just fell asleep now. As a result, he woke up with the sound of a big hammer hitting the wall an hour later. Pepper didn't comb his head, and didn't paint any makeup, so he ran down and said, Tony. What are you doing? You still let me sleep, I still can't handle the company's affairs. Once in the basement, Pepper first saw Tony swinging the hammer and Ino sitting beside him. She asked incredulously, You got Ino over when you went out after 6 o'clock. What are you doing to disturb him? If you don't rest, others won't rest. That was past 6 o'clock. Tony swung the sledgehammer and said, You were wrong, I let Ino come before 6 o'clock. You. Pepper was about to collapse by Tony. You still have a face to look up. At this time Tony took the break and raised his watch and glanced at it. If you still have time to quarrel with me, why don't you help me go to the industrial factory with some particle pipes, optical prisms, and some cables? Wait for things to come. This is something that I and Ino are building together. This thing is very useful. We all need you. When Pepper heard that Tony was not messing around, but was building something with Ino, he immediately understood. But she still said in a somewhat angry tone, Yes. After watching Pepper leave, Tony turned around and asked, Why did I listen to me as long as I move you out of Pepper? Do you know any magic? Regarding this, Ino said it had nothing to do with me. Then until noon, Tony didn't know where he touched 2 sunglasses and handed them to Ino. Then he brought one himself and said, Next, I have to modify the cables. The speed of light through the pipe requires a lot of cables. Fortunately, my basement is enough. Just now Pepper has transported the particle pipeline, and there are some other things and so on. Ino looked at Tony who was busy and asked, How long do you expect to be before the new elements are built after these are installed? Tony thought about it when he was hitting the floor with the electric drill and said, Tomorrow is the fastest, and tomorrow is the slowest. I have asked the Ministry of Industry to make parts that preserve the energy of the new elements. Then there are new arc reactors and other equipment, etc. These, all need to arrive at night. I am just making preparations in advance. Ino nodded, then took out his phone and said, Then you should have time. What's too late? Tony questioned. Ino threw the phone to him. The above news is exactly the news from Hammer Industries yesterday. Hammer Industries and the military have reached the latest cooperation, and it is suspected that the new steel armor unit will be announced the next night. After Tony finished watching, he stopped working and touched his chin. After a while, he asked, Do you think anyone in this world besides I can build an arc reactor? Ino spread his hands and said that he didn't know. Tony thought for a while, and then Ivan Vanki flashed in his mind. Whiplash said, If Hanmer really has this technology, it can only be Vanki's technology. But then Tony shook his head again and said, but isn't he dead? But Ivan Vanki is not dead. He was saved by Han Mo. Hanmer Industries' newest steel unit is, he made it. The prison's announcement is that he is dead, but do you really believe what the prison said? Eno said. Tony nodded confirmingly after hearing it. It looks like you need to pay attention. The words of the prison cannot be completely believed. The rich and powerful there can really control a lot of news. It is very simple for Justin Hammer to fake Vanki's death with some means. Next, Tony still needs to wait until the evening to have the materials to make the new element collider. Eno looked at his watch and said, Tony, I will go back first, and I will come again tomorrow. Hey, you don't expect this great time all night, you are the only witness. Tony was suddenly surprised that Eno didn't have much interest in this. Eno pointed to the floor of the power distribution box that had been smashed into a hole and said, can you make it for me now? Cannot. Tony put on sunglasses and said, the material hasn't arrived yet. Then you can't do anything special. Eno suddenly breathed. Look at how big your dark circles are, you haven't slept for 2 days. Could we just wait until the materials arrive and see if you build it? When Tony heard that the dark circles under his eyes were wide, he walked to the mirror and took a look. He looked into the mirror and touched his dark circles and said, well, I really want to sleep. But before that, I need something that allows me to sleep well. Tony talked and walked to his research desk. Then he bent down and took out a rectangular box from the inside. After he pressed his fingerprint, there was a drop. The remaining 5 thinners showed up. Tony took out one from the inside and said, does it feel that this technology is full of sense? Neuropathy. Eno was grinned by Tony. Next, Tony put the thinner in the mirror and gave him a shot. Forehead. Tony made a nasty voice. I can't stand you anymore. Eno waved his hand and walked out. I'll go back first. You can call me over after you build this. Bye, Eno. Tony threw away the thinner syringe, and then walked upstairs as well. I'm going to have a good night's sleep too. At noon the next day, Eno gets the news from Pepper that Tony is still sleeping. And she and Natasha are about to attend the Hanmer Industries conference tonight. After all, they are all big companies, and others invite her, and Pepper can't say nothing. What's more, Hanmer Industries has made great progress on the internet this time. He borrowed Iron Man's recent comments in Society and the government to launch this press conference with a victory. Moreover, the venue used for this press conference was also the site of the New York Expo hosted by Eno and Tony. But Eno doesn't have to go. After all, it is not a type of company. Biology and industry do not match karma. At this time, Eno's private cell phone rang. Take a look at the phone call from the egg. After Eno connected, he said directly, Director Fury, didn't you have an appointment at 2 yesterday, why did you finish today? The sound of marinated eggs came from the phone. There was indeed an urgent matter yesterday. Agent Coulson arrived in New Mexico last night, and he reported to me this morning an important thing. Eno listened silently. He wouldn't ask what important things were. If something goes wrong, it's still a trouble. So, you love to say or not. After a while, the depressed voice of marinated egg came. We found a hammer in New Mexico. It's about 40. The size of a hammer is the size of 2 40-size shoes stacked together. 2 size 40 shoes. Do you like this to compare Thor's hammer? Then the halogen egg continued. But this is not the most amazing thing. The most amazing thing is that no one can pick him up. Nobody. Repeat these words in a deeper and deeper way. Then he said, and even if we dig out a layer of soil under it, but, after the hammer is dropped, it still can't be picked up, and it's the same in the process. All in all, I can't pick up this hammer anyway. So, do you want to come and take a look to see why people can't pick up this hammer? After listening to these words from Fury, Eno took a deep breath and exhaled it slowly. He leaned on his forehead and said to Fury on the phone, Director Fury, do you know what company our umbrella is? Umbrella Biological Company. Fury replied. Then you found that this hammer has a hammer relationship with me. Eno, desperate, said, it's not that he doesn't know this hammer. Isn't it Thor's hammer? But he can't go straight to find that hammer or know this hammer somehow. If he takes the initiative to tell Fury, I'll take a look at it right away. Or I know wait. Didn't that proactively expose yourself and arouse a lot of suspicion? I know. Fury said over there again. But think about it, people can't hold this hammer, and no creature can do it. Doesn't creatures can't pick up the hammer also have something to do with your umbrella? Yi was speechless for a while. You understand so well. Reading comprehension is an iron score. Fry, Ino said in a deep voice, are you just, you want me to go over and take a look with your own eyes and find something to do for me? I didn't say that. Fry suddenly refused. Yes, you didn't say that. Ino finally said to Fury on the phone, I will go to New Mexico in a few days and meet Coulson. Then thank you first, it's pretty hot over there, you. Dudu Furui looked at the hung-up cell phone in the Senqui building. Then he put the phone away. Hill looked at Fury holding the file and asked, do I have to test Ino like this? Of course not, I just tested this one last time. Fury leaned back in his chair and looked out the window and said, I want to see if Ino goes where there will be problems. Although in all the current incidents, only Corvo Academy has evidence of Ino's presence and none of the others. But we can only get the surveillance video outside the umbrella and not the surveillance video inside the umbrella. If Ino has other ways to get off the top floor, he now has a steel armor. Hill thought about it for a while and said, except for the last time he went to Malaysia to be a bit suspicious, we have no reason to doubt Ino in any subsequent events. Fury shook his head. No, one thing is fine. Hill looked at Fury questioningly. Fury looked out the window without turning his head and said, remember the last time I met the gods on the streets of Harlem? Hill was a little surprised and said, you won't doubt Ino just because of this. What does Ino have to do with the gods? Fury shook his head slightly, then turned to look at Hill and said, when I communicated with the gods that day, I vaguely felt Ino's temperament there. If I didn't look at the appearance, I even thought Ino was standing there. As soon as Fury finished speaking, Hill was curious, didn't you only exchange 5 words? Fury, can we not mention this? Fury sat in a chair and turned around. He looked at Hill deeply and said, don't doubt the intuition of a king of agents. Hill covered her forehead, and finally asked, then what happened in New Mexico this time is Ino being tested for the last time, and next time? The last time, Fury affirmed. If I don't see any clues this time, I will abandon Ino's watch list. Hill nodded and walked away holding the file. Maybe the king of agents has a particularly keen instinct, but he might be wrong this time. From hour to afternoon, Ino sits in the office floor of the Umbrella building. Suddenly, Ino looked up. It felt a person flying on the Umbrella building. At the same time, there was communication from my mobile phone. Tony's. After the connection, Tony's relaxed and happy tone came, Kong busy. Put on the steel armor, let's go to my house to assemble the equipment. Hey, listening to Tony's voice like a child, Ino said helplessly, okay, wait for me on the top of the building. Hurry up. Tony's words are like when your little friend invited you out to play when you were a kid. Ino hangs up the phone. Looked at the steel armor next to the bookcase behind him. Well, this is the first time I wear you. Walk to the battle armor. As each part opens in turn, Ino put on the steel armor. At the same time, holographic images and system sounds came from the helmet of the steel armor. Pupillary scanning is successful, the characteristics match Mr. Ino, I am Mark IV, please name the pure system. Ino thought about it, and named it, Saturday and Weekend. The double brake system was named successfully. Before getting familiar with the double brake, I will intelligently control this armor for you. In fact, the name Ino has a profound meaning. You take a look. As the boss, Ino also likes to spend 5 and 28 hours off. Rest 2 is equivalent to 2 days off. So the name Ino on weekends is my favorite. Well, it's not just taken casually. Mr. Tony Stark requests communication passed. At this time, Tony's big head was shown in the visor of the helmet. Tony urged, I've been waiting for you for a year. You won't activate the armor for the first time, right? It's really the first time. Ino nodded, lifted the red and yellow right leg and walked out of the office to the rooftop. After a while, the 2 Iron Man flew away from the roof of the Umbrella building. Above the clouds, Tony asked in the voice channel, how does it feel to fly? Ino, satisfied, nodded. Not bad. After a while, Eno followed Tony to his mansion and Seaview Villa. But at the same time, Fury, who had just hung up with Eno, received the news within a few hours. Shield. The radar scans of the intelligence center showed that 2 Iron Man marinated eggs appeared over New York City. The 2 men are going to do something, but if Eno uses his ability to fly away, then use the ability to stealth, whether it is radar or satellite, or the naked eye can't easily find it. For example, 2 snipers on the streets of Harlem were watched next to Eno and did not find Eno during the whole process. But at that time Eno can't move. Otherwise, the environment will be invisible and there will be visual fluctuations like when the fire burns the air. Come to Tony's house. The 2 flew directly to the basement on the negative floor. Tony came out of the steel armor and said, "Don't come out. Help me carry heavy things and particle pipes." Eno, "You make me a coolie because of your feelings." Eno said, depressed in the battle armor. "That's right, but there is no reward." Tony snapped open the locks of several wooden boxes with a large pair of scissors. After opening, inside are all particle pipelines. Tony pointed to the pipe in the hole over there that had just been smashed yesterday and said, "We need to start connecting from the power supply over there. Then go through this wall until I reach where I stand now. The particle pipeline will become a circle during this process, but it doesn't matter," Tony said, gesturing a position and height with his hand, and continued, "Then there will be a refracting triangular prism here. It will be responsible for refracting new elements and particles into the triangular energy block just sent by the Ministry of Industry." Tony walked to a box on a table and picked up an arc reactor with a triangular groove and a triangular block from it. Tony lifted these 2 things towards Eno and said, "These 2 are temporarily assembled by me, there should be no problem. This triangle is responsible for storing energy. You know about this arc reactor. I could have built a giant particle accelerator to create new elements. But it takes a long time, and I don't have enough time. What's more, I only have 1 copy of the new element materials, and I don't have enough time to use up." Finally, Tony put down the 2 things on his hand and walked to the Mark IV that Eno was wearing and asked, "Did you understand what I just said?" Eno's voice came from Mark's armor. "The profession is different, but I understand a little bit." Pop. Tony clapped his hands and said happily, "That's enough, let's get started." First, it is placed on the base of the pipe. Tony gave Eno a hand-drawn simple drawing. "Anyway, for these bases, you need a support point between every 2 pipes." Eno nodded and moved all the stools in Tony's house to cushion them. Among them are sofas, pots, drunk driving, bookcases, bedside tables, boxes, knife boxes, etc. "Anyway, I got everything I need." Finally, the 2 set up the particle pipeline. Tony brought a level tester to test the level of these pipes. After he tried them one by one, he exclaimed, "I didn't see it, you are good at craftsmanship, and you can build such a stable level in the Mark armor. Eno, you think I am like your character. So nice." Tony took this sentence and continued, "Furthermore, what does your character have to do with your craftsmanship?" "Character and mood affect state and level," Eno simply said. "These, of course there is a relationship." Tony spread his hands and recognized this sentence and said, "Look at the particle accelerator that circles around. We use other arc reactors to power it. Then it will quickly circle the particle pipe in this pipe at the speed of light." Tony walked to another small box, and he took out a triangular prism from it and continued, "Now I want to put this thing in the center of the particle accelerator's pipe. Then when it reaches its highest power, I turn this handle and shoot it into that triangle." Following the direction Tony pointed, Eno saw Tony's triangle stand on a table. "Oh, I haven't installed it yet," Tony murmured, reached out from his pocket and took out the triangle that was just put in and threw it to Eno. "Just put it in. Because Eno is inside the diameter of the particle acceleration ring. And Tony is outside the particle acceleration ring. So just now Tony threw the triangle to Eno for him to install it." Eno controlled Mark's armor and grabbed the triangle block and said, "You are not afraid that it will break?" Tony smiled and said, "It's very hard, how can it break when you catch it?" After Eno received the triangle block, turn around and walk towards the energy harvester bracket. After putting the triangle in, Eno stood by. Tony looked at the prism and gestured in the direction. you have to stand on the side of the energy collector. This side will be the place where the high-speed particle energy passes. Eno nodded and walked to the other side of the energy harvester bracket. Then Tony pre-demonstrated with his hand and said, after a while, when the particle pipeline accelerates to the highest energy, I will move the rotating handle to control the prism refraction. Then the energy of the high-speed particles will sweep in parallel to the direction I am currently gesturing. If you guessed it correctly, everything along the way will be pierced and cut off. You must be careful and more cautious. Even if my Mark's armor is cut, it will penetrate directly. Don, don't touch the energy beam with any part of your body. Do you understand? Faced with Tony's many prompts, Eno nodded in Mark IV's suit. This is equivalent to, Eno, the energy beam of a high-energy laser, doesn't want to eat at once. Even the physique of one's own heavenly god descended from the earth could not hold up the continuous laser cutting. But it shouldn't be a big problem if you touch it. It should not be cut easily. Finally, Tony got confirmation from Eno. He took the key and turned on the function switch of the ARC's reaction furnace box. Looking at the box emitting a faint blue light, Tony's hand floated on the start button and looked back at Eno and said, I'm about to start, let's witness this moment. Boom, the energy of the buzzing muffled sound passed by in rapid wave after wave. After a while, the energy value of the particle accelerator immediately reached the upper limit due to the large number of functions of the arc reactor box. Jarvis reported, Sir, it's close to the highest energy value. Tony came back quickly, picked up the big wrench on the table, stuck it on the prism rotating pulley and watched Eno heavily, Kong busy. Turn it over for me. The high-speed energy laser, which is close to the maximum energy, is now obsolete. It not only emits a terrifying blue light, and all the roads were cut open. If you have seen water cutting, then this blue laser is equivalent to an infinite enhanced version. Then, the laser struck the wall. The wall was penetrated. The laser strokes the steel beam. The steel beam was broken down. Then it passes through boxes, cabinets, etc. But there is no doubt that they were all broken down. Tony looked at the laser getting closer and closer to the triangle and reminded Eno, be careful, the last meter. Wearing a steel armor, Eno gave Tony a gesture, but his eyes kept looking at the position of the laser. Tony nodded, gritted his teeth and increased his last force to push the prism past. The laser passes through the shelf. The shelf is broken down. At this time, the laser is only 20 to the triangle block. Suddenly, after the shelf that had just been penetrated fell down, a box on it fell to the ground and actually slipped over. This weight and the speed of sliding, and its direction. It will hit the bracket with the triangular energy block. Bang! The table is knocked down. Tony yelled, be careful. At this moment, it's just a matter of time. Eno wore a steel armor and grabbed the triangular energy bracket. Tony's hand also stopped moving quickly. The laser also stopped. But this energy particle acceleration pipeline is about to reach its highest energy. If it is not possible to input energy into the triangle at that time, it will end in failure this time. Tony said anxiously, get out of Eno, the steel armor can't stop the laser. Saying that Tony is about to go to the arc reaction box to turn off the energy function. Do not talk nonsense. Eno wore a battle armor holding the small circular fixed ring and said, the material is only enough for once in a short time, and the position I hold can't be cut by the laser. In fact, this laser can cut it. But based on the feeling, Eno can only cut the fingernails. So the fingers are completely fine. Tony went to the foot of the box and had a meal. He took his sunglasses back and took a closer look. But because of the strong light of the laser and sunglasses, Tony also thought that the position of Eno's grip was reached by the laser. But he still hesitated. Hurry up, Eno reminded Tony, who was still thinking. The pipeline acceleration is about to reach its full value. If you hesitate further, the laser that reaches the full amount will penetrate the basement and penetrate into the city. Tony looked at Eno one last time. Since it was all right, he pressed the sunglasses tightly. Go up and hold the wrench again, bite and move the prism again. The burning of the ZZ laser approached again. After a strange noise. After cutting off the 2 mm fingernails of Eno's fingertips, the laser penetrated the triangular ring again. This ring was directly melted and cut through quickly. Then, the laser hits the triangle again. The energy is close to the maximum. For a moment, the abnormal sound of the laser fell silent, and the triangle blocks are getting brighter and bluer. After a few seconds, it absorbed the new elemental energy in a short period of time. At the same time, it also emits brilliant blue light and power. When the particle acceleration pipeline stopped, Tony took off his sunglasses and saw that the tip of Eno's index finger was actually empty. Because Eno's fingers were wrapped in steel armor. Cutting off Eno's fingernails also means that the outer steel armor will be cut off from the fingertips. His fingertips were shaved off. Tony threw away his sunglasses quickly. He didn't even care about the triangle of the new element, bent over and crawled under the particle pipe to Eno's side. Picking up the steel armor and taking a look, Tony quickly asked, "Did you cut the bone?" No, he just scratched my nails and didn't cut the meat." With that said, Eno put the new element energy block directly on the ground. Then, as the battle armor decomposed step by step, Eno came out of the steel battle armor. He held the nail that had just been cut off and put his right hand in front of Tony and looked at it. Tony immediately let out a sigh of relief after seeing Eno's "Okay, it's okay, I still want to use your product for yourself. Relax with the atmosphere." Tony once again looked at the new element triangles on the ground emitting blue light and asked himself happily, "We succeeded. Then you have to try." Eno pointed to the triangular grooved reactor on the table over there. Tony found a small clip, then squatted on the ground and clipped the blue emitting triangle. He took the triangular grooved arc reactor again. At last, Tony put the triangular energy block into the groove of the reactor. There was a mechanical sound from the caliper, and the triangular arc reactor swallowed the triangular block. With the launch of the function engine, the entire arc reactor also began to emit a strong blue light. "Jarvis, test it," Tony said. "Jarvis, good sir." Eno looked at the arc reactor being tested and asked, "How long will this take?" Tony looked at the data report on the projection and said, "It may take 12 days. Seeing Tony, who was busy, Eno went upstairs to rest for a while. After half an hour, Eno's private cell phone calls Helen. After the call, Helen said, "Eno, Pepper invited Angela and I to attend the press conference of Hanmer Industries tonight. Are we going?" Forehead. Eno thought for a while. "Okay, you can go, but things might be a bit big over there tonight. You guys protect Pepper, by the way." "Okay." Although Helen was surprised that something would happen there, she still said calmly. Both herself and Angela are strengthened by the sub-god descending to the earth. It has extraordinary combat power when it is not in the form of the Valkyrie angel. At this moment, Tony snapped up from downstairs suddenly and said, "Eno, come and have a look, Ivan Vanki is moving. He is still alive." Eno just finished hanging up the phone. Now follow Tony to the basement. Tony took Eno to the light screen and pointed out, "Ivan Vanki just talked to me for a while, I will tell you briefly. He said that he would pay me back for 40 minutes what my family did to him for 40 years. But after I tracked it for a short period of time, its final address was in Manhattan, New York and neighboring boroughs, but further tracking was cut off." Eno embraces his arms and thinks about it. Then he said, "Helen just called and told me that Pepper invited them to Hanmer Industries to participate in the press conference. Pepper and Natasha seem to have been justly invited, not the bad ones." Tony's eyes widened in an instant. The press conference held by Hanmer Industries is the New York Expo prepared by Eno and Tony. And the last address that Vanki tracked was actually there. There is no doubt about it. Hanmer Industries and Ivan Vanki, who had been skeptical, are now directly connected. Tony picked up the arc reactor under test. Then he reached out to dismantle the arc reactor on his chest. "Jarvis, sir, the new element has not been tested yet, and it is not sure whether harmful substances will be produced in your body. Just test like this." After Tony finished speaking, he took down the arc reactor in his chest. Then directly install the new element triangle arc reactor. For a moment, Tony, who installed the arc reactor, directly started full power. Then there was a strong blue light emitting from the entire reactor. Ahem. Tony coughed twice. His face was a little bit uncomfortable by the violent energy. Tony looked at Eno's face twitching and said, "It tastes a bit like coconut. And metal. Wow, this feels great." After a while, Tony's face slowly returned to normal. Eno watched the barcode on his neck disappear and said, "Look at the barcode on your chest." Tony unbuttoned his shirt. The blood vessels that were originally black violet are gone. It is replaced by a normal skin appearance. Eno looked at and nodded and said, "It seems that when the arc reactor had an effect just now, it also accelerated the blood circulation in your body and purified the toxicity in your body." Wow. Tony touched the skin next to his chest and said, "This feels a little bit magical." "Fasten your shirt." Tony looked at the armor next to him and said, "There is no time, I have to rush to the New York Expo site as soon as possible." After speaking, he turned and looked at Eno and said, "You still don't want to go?" "Why?" Eno questioned. "First, you are not familiar with the use of steel armor, and the intelligence system cannot be fully emergency controlled during battle. Second, it's too dangerous. My suit of armor has the infrared laser equipment I thought of before, and now it can finally be used, and your finger has been broken. The steel armor is not suitable for combat." Eno spread his hands. "Then I will go back to Gila, Helen, and your Pepper at the New York Expo." Tony hurriedly walked to Markjaw and said, "Then you put on the armor and take Pepper, Angela and Helen. I will ask Justin Hammer where Vanky is." Eno nodded. It was more reasonable. Moreover, if time is urgent, he can also become a god and fly back. After that, the two entered the battle armor together. Flew out directly from Tony's underground garage passage. The scene of the New York Expo at this time. It's now more than 7 in the evening. Justin Hammer just showed off his sea, land and air and full-featured 4 series of steel troops on stage. Natasha looked at these in the audience with a little surprise. The bloated armor. She couldn't believe that Hammer had actually made this kind of armor that mimics Tony. Although it is a bit bloated and looks inflexible in a single way to fight. But these battle armors are genuine war machines. And how their energy source problem was solved, Pepper went to Angela after watching it next to him and asked, "How do these armors compare to Tony's?" Angela shook her head and said, "Although it is not a professional, it is clear that Hammer Industries' armor is a heavy robot, and he probably does not have an intelligent control system." At this time, Helen also said, "Look at its abdomen, it has no flexible abdominal curling function at all, only a few tiny axial movement functions." Pepper nodded after understanding. She looked at these armors and felt that they were not as good as Tony's in appearance. At this moment, 2 subsequent waves of sonic boom sounded over the New York Expo. Everyone raised their heads. 2 red and yellow figures with hands and feet radiating energy came to the sky in a moment. Tony flew directly to the stage and questioned Hammer, "Where is Vanky?" Justin Hammer pretended to be confused and asked, "Vanky, what do you ask me for?" And Eno sighed. He fell directly between Angela and Pepper and said, "Time is urgent, I won't say more, you are leaving now." As soon as the 2 Iron Man. Eno finished speaking, the audience and the TV station's live broadcast saw 2 Iron Man on the stage and the other in the audience. Eno directly used the smart voice broadcast to report, "I am the Umbrella Company. Eno, now ask everyone to leave, there is immediate danger here." Eno. In an instant, everyone present burst out louder. "Eno. Gone. I took care that you bought a watch." At this moment, Tony's voice suddenly came on the voice channel. "Eno. Take them away. These armors are in attack state. Their weapons are pointed at me, I am leaving here. Say nothing." I didn't bother to explain to this group of mindless people who are still joining in the fun. Eno pulled up directly and was still there. Pepper, who was dazed, left. And Angela and Helen naturally followed Eno. Tony just flew away. Crackling. The land and naval armor directly raised the weapon in his hand and shot it at Tony, who was flying away. The glass above the exposition was directly broken and dropped. Suddenly the scene, and large cry all happen on the run. They finally know why Eno let them go. Now they all regretted why they didn't listen to Eno and just left, instead they hesitated for a long time and made a fuss. It's a pity that Eno took Angela's Trio 3 away long ago. But Natasha chose to deal with this unexpected situation. Eno just ran out of the field with 3 of 3. Bang, 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 heavy footsteps came. Eno took the time to look back, it was all the sea, and loose steel troops chased to the outskirts of the field. At this time, the entire expo venue was in a mess. The frightened crowd screamed and fled. That does not work. This group of high, loose steel troops are chasing Tony and Mark's armor on himself. Pepper was the second kill target. Pepper must be sent away first and then lead them away. Eno looked at Angela and Helen and said, "Take my elbow." The two understood at once. At this time, Eno had to hug Pepper and let Angela and Helen take his elbow and finally fly away together. Bring three at once. Because Angela and Pepper have extraordinary physiques, there is no need to worry about them being unable to hold on. Eno is still watching. Pepper is shocked. Just hug her up. Eno. Pepper was surprised. I want to send you away first, otherwise Tony won't play well. Eno briefly explained. Then he waited until Angela and Helen took their elbows. Boom. Energy erupts under the feet. Eno took three people directly. At this time, Tony's communication ran into a voice. Eno, be careful, there are 2 Air Force suits flying towards you. Tony just finished speaking. Weekend break. Sir, it is detected that there are 2 battle armors approaching in the rear, and it is expected to enter combat distance in 1.5 minutes. Even if Eno took Pepper with him a long time in advance. But because of holding Pepper, he didn't fly fast at all. These 2 Air Force suits will be able to fly over soon. Eno simply said to Angela. After 1 minute, I will send you to the ground, you take Pepper with you, and I will lead the back away. Angela nodded. There is nothing wrong with these. After 1 point, Eno put the dazed Pepper on the ground, and Angela and Helen also came down. After taking a look at them, Eno looked back and saw 2 flame jets approaching quickly in the night sky. I'm leaving, you take Pepper back to the Umbrella Company. Angela and Helen nodded. Eno flew away with his hands and feet down. Weekends. Sir, I suggest you give it to the smart combat mode. If there are only 2 enemies, the armor will only be slightly damaged. Jarvis' system is blessed with Tony's remote computer computing power. But not on weekends, so in the case of the same smart hosting, Jarvis is more than a little different. Eno nodded. Enter the smart battle hosting mode. Weekends. Smart battle hosting mode is now. For a moment, the eyes of the Mark's armor that Eno originally wore turned red. Using its mobility, it rushed to high altitude over the heads of the 2 Air Force armors behind. Then rushed down in the form of a dive. At the moment of approach, Eno raised his 2-handed energy cannon and aimed it at the 2 Air Force armors. Boom. One hit directly destroyed, and the other was evaded by Venki's emergency control. I didn't see it. Venki is still a master at playing games. The current battle armor is controlled by Venki within Hanmer. At this time, Natasha had also forced out Justin Hammer where Venki was. She is rushing to Hanmer Company. But after a battle armor on this side was destroyed, there is another. The Air Force armor took time to directly raise the machine gun on the arm and shoot Eno's steel armor. Ding ding. The steel armor was shot twice in the abdomen, but the subsequent bullets were evaded by the intelligent stress. Weekend. Sorry, sir, the curling function of the armor is damaged. I have done my best, but you can't bend down now. Eno. At this time, Tony shouted in the voice channel again, you guys are fighting, be careful. Just hold on as much as possible, I will solve them. But suddenly Tony shouted again, 3 more full-featured armors are flying towards you. You are flying to the military base. There will be the military's air defense system. My steel armor can dodge the flexibility. They can't. Okay, wait until I get rid of this one in front of me, it knows Pepper's location. After Eno finished speaking, he directly asked Mark's armor to rush over to solve the armor that knew Pepper's location. Less than 1 point. Beep. 1 no doubt. In the case of Mark battle armor taking the initiative to strike first. The battle armor was destroyed without damage. Eno stood in the air, looking at the full-featured armor that flew from a distance. On weekends, he reminded, Sir, I suggest you fly to a military base, where I can evade the air defense system intelligently, but they can't. Do not. Eno shook his head and said, that would be tantamount to invading military bases and confronting the government. Now you should dismantle them without remembering the damage. Weekends. However, the armor may be completely damaged, and you may also be in danger. Eno. Do as I say. Weekends. Yes, sir. If Eno doesn't do this, how bad the battle armor is, how can the gods come out and wait for a while to be lashed out, and Tony's Mark battle armor will have a disadvantage. The gods who don't have Ino go to help Tony alone are likely to overturn the car. At this point, Ino wore the Mark armor to travel with the same flexibility to travel the 3 full-featured armors. Boom, boom, after a fierce exchange of fire in the air. Ino's battle armor intelligent combat system relies on flexible maneuverability to destroy 2 full-featured battle armors. Weekends. Sir, it seems to be very easy this time. The level of their battle armor controllers has dropped. Although the controlled double brake system says so. But Ino felt something was wrong. Why the level of these armors suddenly dropped, but just when the last armor was attacked. A 15 micro missile was ejected from the shoulder of the fully functional armor. Hew, boom, boom, the intelligent combat system raised its right hand and attacked the missile in an emergency. But it also caused the battle armor to be destroyed by a direct explosion. The Mark's battle armor, which was already close to the attack, was also affected. Now, one of the 2 battle armors in the air turned into sparks and spread out. But the other red and yellow armor suddenly lost its power and fell towards the sea at an altitude of hundreds of meters. Weekends. Sir, an emergency report has been sent to Mr. Stark, and the arc reactor of War A is damaged. A. Energy supply. Off, go. The speech is closed, and the energy delivery is interrupted. At the same time, the steel armor automatically disintegrated in the air. Above the sky, a red and yellow voice kept spinning and falling. He heads up for a while and heads down for a while. When Ino heard the intermittent words at the end of the weekend. When the visor was suddenly pitch black, the Ino was stripped out immediately following the automatic decomposition of the battle armor at a height of 100 meters. This, the 100-meter diving event. God descends to the earth for an instant. Ino turned into a pure black god and stood in the air. Finally, I watched the decomposed battle armor fall to the bottom of the sea. I will come back to fish you. Finished. Ino's wings flashed up to the sky in an instant. The environmental stealth function turns the surface into pitch black and the night into one at the moment of transformation. At this point, even if you shine a searchlight on Ino, it will not reflect light. Because of this, light Ino's armor surface can absorb and prevent it from being refracted. At this time, the scene of the expo. Tony wears Mark 6 and prepares to get rid of a large group of Air Force armor and full-featured armor behind him. On the other hand, Road War armor is searching for the location of Tony on the ground. And they are still searching for people and things more related to Tony. Destroy it directly when found. At this time, Tony received the final emergency report of Mark 4. Jarvis. Sir, Mr. Ino's Mark 4 armor was extinguished and fell into the sea due to damage to the arc reactor. But the last message sent to me during the weekend is that Mr. Ino is not injured and has been out of the armor. Ino, it's okay. Tony was surprised at first, and then immediately relieved. Who is the weekend? Jarvis. Mr. Ino's system, sir. Tony. It's a good name, I also like weekends. What Tony was worried just now was that since the arc reactor was damaged, the armor fell into the sea. Without leaving the armor, Ino would drown 100% of the time. But fortunately, the intelligent system decomposed the armor in advance, otherwise it would be over. At this time, the armors behind Tony were still violently chasing Tony. After Tony circled around a few times, his eyes are on the big earth of the expo. Although there are many places on the big earth that are empty. However, the locations on several continents are made of solid metal. According to these, judging from the heavy armor, Tony can stop turning and flying away in time. And these, the bloated armor can only explode into fireworks because it hits the metal too fast. Tony looked at the big earth model ahead and said, calculate the steering flight path. Jarvis. Sir, already done. Next, Tony accelerated the flight directly following Jarvis's route. Then, after entering the large Earth model, he suddenly rolled over and slowed down and then flew to another place. This operation is as smooth as flowing water. But the Air Force suits behind Tony didn't have that fast reaction speed. Boom, 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 boom. After bursts of explosions, these armors all turned into sparks. Roar. Tony happily handed in and stopped in the air to look at these fireworks said. Trash is trash, how could it be possible to imitate my Mark's armor? But this time, Vanki has launched a batch of Air Force and full-featured steel armor in the head office of Hanmer Industries. Because he is alone for remote control. Therefore, the control of the batch just now is the limit of Vanki. But now these, after they all exploded, Vanki directly activated the final intelligent program, cut off the link between the armor and the server, and turned around and left. Because at this time Natasha had already killed her. If he doesn't leave, he will be dragged by Natasha, and there will be no time to go to Tony in the armor he modified privately. In the center of the fair, Tony was hovering high in the sky and was preparing to go down to solve the sea on the land, and the news came from Jarvis when he was passing the steel troops. Jarvis, sir, there are more than a dozen suits flying towards you. Tony looked at the position of the expo stage, and a dozen more battle armor flew towards him from the stage. But, these on land, what to do with these? The sea, road armor is damaging the field. They are even shooting and killing civilians indiscriminately. However, he lacked the ability to dominate the 4 battle armors at the same time. Tony, Jarvis, what to do? Jarvis suggested. Sir, I suggest you deal with these Air Force armors first, they are the most lethal, and at the same time, confrontation will be life-threatening. And it's better to draw them together, and then use infrared lasers to solve them together. Nice attention. Tony nodded but still said, but the point is how I draw them together, I can't hold them alone. Just when Tony was thinking, there was another silver figure in the sky. The Arhu figure fell on the square without telling it, and then killed the land steel armor. Relying on gliding on the ground for the first time, several battle armors were cut off. Woohoo! Tony whistled to the familiar figure, look who is here. Jarvis put the image of Eno just now in front of Tony's eyes and said, the god is here, he seems to be going directly to deal with those, land armor. Tony apparently said softly, then I will deal with these Air Force armors and act separately. Jarvis, okay, sir. At this time, Eno, who had just severed the 2 armor, stood on the square and watched Tony in the sky take away more than a dozen Air Force armors. Eno is holding a giant sword in his hand. Shoulders da 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 ding ding Eno came a hitting sound. Looking back, it was the naval suit's hand machine gun shooting at him. But, a weapon of this caliber would not harm him. At the very least, armor-piercing shells fired by tanks are needed. But even the main gun on the shoulder of the army's battle armor can cause Eno to have a small amount of damage at most. Carrying the giant sword, Eno looked at the 9 separate battle armors behind him. The light feather wings lit up in an instant. Only light and shadow remained on the square. But correspondingly, 2 of these 9A have been cut off. Da 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 da, the remaining battle armor quickly fired at Eno without saying a word. Eno flashed directly, and then something interesting happened. Because they have no brains at all, it is inevitable that they will only write mentally handicapped operations. When they shot towards the middle Eno, they didn't even think about whether they would hit their own people. Fire with them. Eno flashed directly. The sound of da 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 hit each other directly. You guys, kind of showy. Eno is surprised to see a side. This wave of mutual shows. The battle with only 7 units left directly blasted each other 4. That is to say, there are only 3 left. They shoot without even thinking about the consequences. Because I have no brains. Carrying the giant sword, after Eno's continuous slashing, the remaining 3 battle armors were cut in half. After solving these, Eno looked around and could no longer see the other armors. But there should be more than that. Where did they go? But now the only thing left to see is the Air Force armor. At this time, the venue had been emptied, and the crowd who had fled in panic had already ran away. Eno raised his head and looked into the distance. A relatively small red and yellow figure is being chased by more than a dozen Air Force armors. The hesitation is due to the downtown of New York. Tony is still reluctant to fight back directly. In Mark 6:2 asked Jarvis, where are the more open areas? I want to lead them there. Jarvis, below the large Earth model that just induced the steering is a natural park, where there is enough open area. Tony nodded, and flew towards the natural park with his hands and feet directly adjusting the direction. Seeing a group of mechas flying away with Tony, Eno flew towards the natural park at the same time. Bang! Wow! Tony stepped on the water in the natural park and splashed. Immediately after, bang, 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 more than a dozen battle armors fell near Tony. But at the same time, Eno is also floating above their heads. Jarvis. Sir, the gods are on your head. Tony wore a battle armor and suddenly raised his head in surprise and said, hey, in fact, you don't need to use it, I can solve it alone. Eno held the sword and spit out 4 words lightly, too much nonsense. Forehead. Tony was speechless. Well, you look like a friend of mine, he is also direct and too lazy to talk nonsense. I rely on. Now it's Eno's turn. He forgot this, his temperament when he used the gods to descend to the earth seemed to have only become colder. But the subjective temperament and momentum seemed to have not changed. Looking at the silent god, Tony couldn't figure out what he was doing. Because Eno's god descended to the world only had a cold light visor with only one missing eye. But this time, the Air Force suits won't wait for Tony and the gods to chat. They directly raised the machine in their hands and prepared to shoot. Tony directly raised his hands to accumulate energy and fired. If you come to help me, just deal with them by the way. I'm going to find my friends. Find friend Eno to react directly. Tony is going to get rid of these armors quickly and then go find himself. Well, it seems to be resolved quickly. Tap 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 for a moment. The entire natural park was full of fires and stray bullets. Boom, boom, boom. Tony keeps firing the energy cannon in his hand. The Mark 6 armor on him can defend against ordinary machine guns. As long as it is not fired from the main gun of the army battle armor. Tony just needs to deal with it carefully. Chang chang chang. After several consecutive attacks. Within a few minutes, Tony and Eno killed all the armor. Tony controls the battle armor to place the bottom armor. He looked at the deity behind him, obviously a little more than himself, and said, how did you kill so fast? Eno ignored him and looked around with his sword. He was suspicious just now. Why are there so few army armors? Just waiting to ambush Tony. Bang Bang gradually approached with more than 20 army armors. Tony's face became serious. Click. The visor of Mark 6 was closed with a sound. Tony said solemnly, I have a suggestion. Say. Eno stands on the creek indifferently. The water flowed continuously across his metal boots. Tony stared at the surrounding army armor and proposed, I have a special large area weapon, wait for me to count 32. Just get down. Eno felt Tony's behavior behind him let out a nasal voice, yeah. There are ghosts when you get down. Tony shouted. 3. Quote exclamation mark quote. And when Vanki, who was rushing over, heard Tony say that it would be fine to get down. Directly set the fall procedure for the army armors. Quote exclamation mark quote. The surrounding army armors all fall down together. And Eno's wings flashed up into the sky in an instant. But Tony squatted with open hands. There was a scream. Suddenly, the army armor was cut in half by infrared laser. Even the surrounding trees or rocks were penetrated. Tony yelled, this is great too, cool. Eno stood in the sky with his arms in his arms and said, didn't you tell me to get down? This is what you did. If I really believe that if you get down, don't you have to be stunned by infrared light? Tony quickly put down his undergarment, raised his hands and shook it, and explained, among the gods I know and analyze, he won't make this action. That's why I let these armors here that I let you get down, they will definitely be controlled by Vanki to fall down. At this time, I just need to squat down and shake my hands to solve it all. You are really a clever ghost. What should I do if this is so terrible to me, although it won't cause serious injuries? But there must be a certain degree of damage. At this moment, boom, another sound heavier than the previous army armor hit the ground. The splash of water was splashed so high. Tony, you got a good helper, but you can only use this weapon once. Vanki landed on the opposite side of Tony in a heavy armor and said, the infrared laser weapon in Tony's hand has been ejected by high-energy burning smoke. This device can only withstand high-energy lasers once. Tony looked at Vanki and said, it really is you, but I can hang you without this weapon. At this moment, shoo, ding ding, Eno looked at Vanki, who had already closed the upper armor, and said regretfully, sure enough, the frontal sneak attack has a relatively low hit rate, so you actually closed it. Oh woo. Tony looked back at the celestial god standing on the ground and said, "You will sneak attack. This will degrade your impression in my mind." "Who cares about your impression so much?" Ino murmured. Seeing Venki with its helmet on, Tony had already covered his upper armor and raised his hands at him. "Are you stupid?" and hit the ground. Seeing that Tony wanted to fight on the ground again, Ino was unbearable and cursed directly. This person obviously likes close combat so much. Hearing the words of the gods, Tony's heart suddenly flashed a familiar feeling. But he still reacted immediately and flew into the sky quickly. Venki's armor flight is particularly clumsy. And he still uses a whip. It's hard to fight Tony in the air, let alone at a god. Tony flew up suddenly. There was a snap, but the whip is faster. Venki slammed Tony's legs directly and pulled him over. Tony suddenly felt the pulling force. Ino watched Tony lift the sword helplessly and was about to cut the whip lock. A sword swung down. Boom! The whip lock tied Ino's sword with another whip and failed to cut it down. Ino looked at Venki and said, "Don't you follow the news? My sword can turn into liquid." Finished. The sword in Ino's hand immediately turned into liquid and received it in his body. Then Ino stretched out his hand. A brand new giant sword was reshaped again. Chang! Just when Venki was still in a daze. Ino has cut all Venki's 2 whiplashes. Tony suddenly broke free of the energyless whip that bound his feet and said, "Thank you." Venki lifted the whip. Looking at the obvious cut off, he said angrily, "I will kill you." Then he threw the energy whiplash into a normal person and rushed up with the shoelace in his hand. Woo! Tony looked at him, then took another look at the gods. The two flew up in sync. The whiplash stopped abruptly where the two of them were. Venki looked at the 2 whip locks that were cut off in his hands. Suddenly shouted angrily at the 2 people in the sky, "Ah!" This was kite flying. Started with cerebral thrombosis for at least 10 years. But Ino didn't say anything, and threw the sword in his hand directly. Venki couldn't react in a dazed manner and could only raise its hand to block it. Pouch! Because the cross-sectional area of the giant sword was too large, Venki's left hand was directly cut off. And Tony, who had the sword inserted directly behind him, was surprised and suddenly said, "Your speed is too fast." He didn't even react to attack. The god threw the sword out of Ino directly. The sword behind Venki turned into another sword directly in his hand and rushed over. Venki gritted his teeth and looked at the sword behind him. Directly put down the whiplock on his right hand, turned around and pulled the sword out behind him to resist Ino's attack. Ah! Seeing Venki picking up his sword, Ino's face smiled under the visor. "Of course the silly sword is for you." Ino's light wings suddenly emitted a brighter light and slashed past it again. Of course, Venki took up the giant sword of the gods in his hand to resist. But at the moment when the 2 swords touched, puff! Ino's figure appeared behind Venki's armor. And Venki stared blankly at the sword that gradually turned into liquid in his hand slowly fell. Cut diagonally from the left shoulder to the right waist. Before he died, Venki still didn't understand why the sword in his hand turned into liquid. Could the gods be able to remotely control it? Even Tony was surprised. In the air, you can control this sword from the air. It's a combination of nano-intelligence. Is it? Ino ignored Tony. He walked over and stepped on with his foot to absorb the liquid that the giant sword had just turned into, and then directly soared into the sky and took off. Tony looked at the god who flew away. He looked at the wreckage of battle armor everywhere on the ground. And the hand of Venki's corpse that was chopped obliquely. He made a row of metal heads, and said afterwards, "Jarvis, quickly set me as the last location for the Ino Mark battle armor to send messages." Jarvis, "Okay sir, the last position of the information is shown at the seaside of Harmonton, but the armor should have fallen into the sea." Tony's face changed slightly and said, "I hope the result will not be so bad, Ino should be able to swim." With that said, he had already flown down to the position of Mark IV with his hands and feet. And Ino's side. After using the Dark Knight environment to stealth, he used the fastest speed and flew to the location where he just crashed. The gods descended from the earth. Ino was relieved. The gods descended from the earth. He jumped into the sea directly. Then climbed up again. I found a place with pleasant scenery and the evening breeze, lying there with my hands behind my head and watching the stars. Eno raised his finger to the stars in the sky and muttered to himself. That is Vega, that is Altair, and, rumbling for a while, the sonic boom of Tonomark's armor came from afar. Bang! In the next moment, Tony hit the ground with one punch and one leg. He stood up and put down his helmet and looked at Eno, sighing, "Thank God you are okay, I'm really worried." Eno's still soaked hands resting on the back of his head asked, "Why don't you just go back to Pepper?" Tony wore a tattered armor and said, "I have contacted Pepper. She has been safely brought to the Umbrella by Angela and Zhao Hailun." Eno nodded, stood up from the ground and pointed to the place where the armor fell and said, "Mark 4 fell into the sea." "Fine." Tony waved his hand indifferently and said, "Tomorrow, someone will come to fish it." As he said, he stepped forward and hugged Eno's shoulders and walked towards the side of the road, saying, "You don't know, I just killed Venki with the gods." The two of us wandered one by one and the other flew a kite to make Venki confused. Finally, we worked together to cut Venki from top to bottom. I feel like vomiting when I think about that scene. Eno, what you said, why is it different from what I experienced? You are not always there, playing soy sauce. How come you worked together to kill Venki? The two walked to the side of the road and waited for a while rear. Finally one of the night cars passed here. Tony directly raised his hand to stop him and shouted, "Taxi! Stop. There is an Iron Man and an umbrella here. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."